Hello, welcome back. As we discussed, transposition is the embedding of European policy, as specified in a directive, into the national legal framework. It means that the goals, as expressed by various norms in the legal measure, as well as the way in which these norms should be achieved, need to be included into national measures. Would simply copying the text of the directive suffice, or is more required? Well, first of all, directives are not regulations. Regulations are sufficiently specific about how a policy should be implemented. Directives leave leeway to national policymakers about how the policy will be implemented. This relative openness to implementation requires member states to make quite a number of additional choices in order to make implementation work. Second, directives may provide national policymakers with explicit discretion in order to further develop a policy. This too requires additional decision-making at the domestic level. Finally, and in view of the negotiations, the text of the directive may be ambiguously formulated. One reason for this is that the subject matter of European policy is very complex. A second reason could be that ambiguity made finding agreement between the Council easier, or agreement between the Council and Parliament. These ambiguities require further interpretation. In view of these features, Member States need to actively transpose directives. The kind of legal measures that are used depend on options available in the national legal framework. This table provides examples found in a study on transposition in a number of EU member states. Note that on the vertical axis, it also includes information on who, within the domestic system, adopts such an instrument. This could be Parliament, the government, or sometimes an individual minister. An important issue here is whether national policymakers can make use of existing delegation clauses within their national system. These possibilities differ between countries. Some countries, like the United Kingdom, have adopted a general authorization law, which permits almost all directives to be transposed through ministerial measures, although they are still subject to parliamentary approval. Also in Spain, France and Italy, Parliament may grant the government the possibility to transpose a group of specific directives through subordinate legislation, for which only parliamentary approval is needed. In those cases, Parliament cannot amend these measures. In France, the Constitution allows the government to adopt decrees to transpose directives in those areas that are not controlled by acts and do not fall within the legislative domain. In other countries, including, for example, Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands, a system of specific delegation prevails. Only on the basis of an act of Parliament is the government of minister permitted to adopt further legislation. This is on a case-by-case basis. This means that only for specific issues or directives may the government or a minister adopt implementing legislation. This type of delegation comes in various forms, including how open it is and whether new directives in the same policy area can be brought under this possibility. The choice of legal instruments, as well as the possibility of delegation, affects the extent to which specific political and administrative actors are involved in transposition. Next to the choice of instrument, a directive can be transposed using different techniques. Among legal experts, but also among policymakers, there is a continuing discussion about what the best method is: direct and literal, or more elaborate and less literal. The first technique, which is associated with a direct and almost literal way of taking over the text of a directive, is called copying out. In this case, the text of a directive is reproduced in national measures. It has the advantage that the text of the national measure stays as close as possible to the original one. The disadvantage is that ambiguities are not well handled. Some countries, like the UK and the Netherlands, officially prefer this method. The second technique is associated with a more elaborate way of including a directive into the national legal framework. It's called rewording. It incorporates the directive into existing laws and other measures by putting it into the language and structure of the national legal framework. It makes the legal framework clear to those who have to work with it. The disadvantage is that it is much more work to the government's legal services, and it may also lead to a change of meaning. A more extreme case is gold plating, when additional national requirements are added to the national measures that are introduced to transpose a directive. An example is the way in which the Dutch government links air quality standards to zoning law, which blocks the development of infrastructural projects when these projects would exceed these standards. The drawback of gold plating is that national preferences and European obligations are mingled, which could lead to a political debate about these requirements and delay transposition. In this lecture, we discussed why directives need to be transposed, including various instruments and techniques. Interestingly, from a legal perspective, there is a discussion on whether transposition should follow a more literal interpretation or require a more elaborate method of rewording, with the risk of introducing rather different priorities. In the next lecture, we will discuss this distinction again, but then from a policy perspective, which sheds a rather different light on this.